The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to the Happiness Jungle TV show. I am your guest host, CamiBaker.com, and I am honored to have a new friend with me today, Amy Mosher Berry. Amy and I met, oh gosh, a couple weeks ago at an event. I'm always out at an event somewhere meeting people, and this lovely woman just approached me and was friendly and vivacious, which is a sorely needed character trait. So I really appreciate her ability to just reach out and be friendly. And we've had a couple of conversations since then. And I wanted to share you, Amy, with our tribe. So please tell our tribe and listeners a little something about yourself.
Oh, well, thanks, Cami. What a wonderful intro. It's been my pleasure to know you over the last, few weeks, I suppose. So a little bit about me. I live right now in Clinton, Massachusetts. Most of my work is in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've been doing community development work in the city of Worcester for about 19 years. I'm originally from Central Mass, and I'm the first person in my family to do the 4-year degree. So I'm the middle child of 3, and the brother was always getting into a little trouble, and the sister was a little babied, and I don't know, I was, right place at the right time, and parents said, Amy needs to do that college thing. So I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I found myself up at UVM, and I did environmental studies and Spanish, and graduated, more years ago than I'd like to admit. And when I left college, it was basically the year of 9/11. So my plans to be an environmental educator many years ago, pretty much overnight, I ended up doing what the people needed. I was an AmeriCorps volunteer doing environmental education work in Worcester, Mass. And really when 9/11 happened, I basically changed my game plan, and I just had to meet people where they were at and help them with, life support, coaching, not life support, if you know what I'm saying, but more in terms of, social services, human services, really helping people see what their lives are about. And I really became passionate about helping people discover their purpose. And I eventually worked for the city of Worcester at the Career Center. And I was, as you probably recall, Cami, really wherever people were at in the United States and many parts of the world in 2009, it was a pretty tough time in the economy. So I was really blessed to be able to help everyday people, a lot of really qualified people that found themselves out of work, in many cases long-term unemployed. And so I was charged with creating innovative solutions to helping, especially long-term unemployed, especially those in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So, a lot of times, not to stereotype, but some of those people that, have high technical degrees or engineers, they could use a little work on the people skills and interpersonal communication. So I was really, passionate about, working with people and building up their confidence and connections and helping people get back to work in a time of high unemployment. And one of the things that I did in government, believe it or not, was to start an entrepreneurship program at the Career Center. And mind you, most viewers here, when they think, Career Center, a lot of times people think of the unemployment office. And we're fortunate that the unemployment level itself across the nation, especially in New England, it's definitely gone down. So it's different now. But back then I was like, we got to figure out ways to help people. And in some cases, if they're people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that had planned to retire, they might be better off being self-employed. So we did that program for almost 3 years, and it was pretty unusual, but relatively successful. And I was able to sort of, just really, I loved that because it sort of helped people reinvent themselves. And then long story short, I, being the entrepreneur in a government cube, had to sort of move along. And one of my entry points out of government at that point was teaching at Worcester State University in urban studies, which is my field, and also in entrepreneurship. So then I was teaching the last 5 years at both Worcester State and Clark University. And I've just recently, as of last month, I have launched my new company, which is called Ambassadors Community Development. So we're an LLC, a community development firm, and we specialize in sustainability education. So we do the What's Hot TV show and podcast featuring ecopreneurs, so people that you may know who have green product, services, or practice that more people need to know about. You've probably heard of what's happening with just basic science reports. It's not looking great in terms of our environmental sustainability forecast, if you will. So I figure, you know what? There's green and green. People can vote with their feet, vote with their dollars. People need to know what are the more environmentally sustainable options. And so I put a spotlight on those ecopreneurs that are bringing those solutions to the world. And the other piece of my company, Ambassadors Community Development, is to leverage a lot of my time working in colleges. I've taught over 650 students in the last 5 years, and I've done a lot of listening, believe it or not, even though I'm doing a lot of talking right now. Sorry about that long intro. And you know what I've heard the students say, that they haven't always really, I believe, been heard by some of the top-down folks, and that's not to throw any particular institution under the bus. It's just the reality of things is that students are really, not to sound too dramatic, but in desperate need of real world experience, work and life readiness skills before they graduate, Cami, so that their degrees, their fancy degrees, are actually useful in today's new economy. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts or questions.
Well, we talked about that before, that, you know, so many of these kids come out of college and they you know, on paper, they're all similarly qualified, but who can actually do this? You know, who can make eye contact and communicate? And, you know, social media has made us the most antisocial people in history. And so, you know, that's sorely needed. And I know that your new company does all kinds of different aspects. Talk a little bit about, for those who are watching, you know, who are you wanting to reach out to? Who can you really help?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So as I mentioned, the What's Hot TV show and podcast plus quarterly events that we do. So if you can envision that piece of my business as one venture among a growing professional network of, could be for-profit, nonprofit, it could even be government entities, anybody who's doing good work in the world that I can connect my students to, people that are in need of college interns, but they don't necessarily know how to access them. Excuse me, it's so exciting. And so it's really people in the community that could really benefit from having a college intern or two or three. And so I would be working with both the internship site and the interns at various schools. The schools, I'm still working through some of those initial agreements. So, you know, we'll probably want to talk in a few months to see sort of exactly how the model is looking. But basically, a lot of schools are interested in having the students have that ideally credit-bearing, community-based internship experience. And so in my efforts to build out this professional network of those who are looking for interns, then I can help be a little bit of a matchmaker, and hopefully it's a real win-win-win.
Well, you mentioned something about quarterly events. What is that all about?
Yes, thanks for asking. So I've been very passionate about, you know, having people really get together. And I think you brought up an excellent point. The irony of the social media age is sort of promoting this perhaps inadvertent, but sort of antisocial behavior. And so to bring people together in person, it not only helps young people, but it helps people of all ages, all stages, all backgrounds, just sort of, you know, old school, get together and network. I really like the idea, especially with my venture focus on environmental sustainability. I like the idea of having 4 quarterly events that actually mirror the season. So especially being here in New England, you know, and really wherever people are, but the idea being every year we'll have something, the month of April, which is sort of Earth Month. People may be familiar with that. And then June, we do something called the Summer Soiree. So we're gearing up for that. And then in the fall, it'll be sort of the time of harvest. So we'll be having a really exciting event in the fall. And then for the new year, I'm really encouraging a New Year's networking. So when I worked in my role for the city, I did some fun events, sort of wacky and not what most people might think of for government programming, but I'm going to be taking some of the best practices there and doing like a New Year's networking to get people out and about and really facilitate some speed networking and to develop common interests, because we all pretty much know, Cami, I know you know this among, you know, with all the work you do, I mean, Okay, yes, it's great for people to search online and understand what some of the trends are and different opportunities. And there are people that absolutely do get their next opportunity online. I'm not saying that's not the place to look, but the reality is most people today, they want to really have that human relationship. And I find whether it's personal or professional, it's a more difficult thing to achieve in today's fast-paced, it's a soundbite world, and we don't often get the opportunity to really interact with people. So I'm really going to be promoting that to help, not only the students, but also people in the community that are looking to find people to work for them or with them. And anything's possible is one of my favorite mantras.
Well, and to your point, people may find opportunities online. And, even when I talk to folks who say, well, I don't really go to networking events and, I meet people on, well, even it doesn't matter where you meet someone online, etc. You got to have human interaction. I mean,
exactly.
You can only hide out in your home and have Amazon deliver stuff so much. I mean, sooner or later, relationships are needed. The interns need to have those interpersonal skills. And,
right.
Even if you're an online marketer and you do all of your courses online, you still got to get on the phone or get on a Zoom or Skype or meet a local person that's going to be putting together your website or your SEO or, taking your headshots. Like there's still human interaction that's needed, no matter how much people try to avoid it.
That's such a great point. I mean, I know there's like a little bit of humor woven into your comment, but it's like, and again, not to stereotype all young people, but I've been working quite a bit with, those who are in the general 18 to 22 population the last few years. And, they really have so much to offer. I think they often get a bad rap. People are like, why do you work with these young people? They're lazy today. They're all moving back into their parents' basement. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of larger sort of macroeconomic issues that contribute to that. It doesn't mean that they're all just, interested in staying put. And why would they have pursued a 4-year degree in the case of many people going to college today if they didn't have plans to actually get out of their parents' basement? So it's like, what is it that they're missing? Well, hate to oversimplify it, but because we live in that soundbite world, I mean, the reality, what I've been able to boil it down to largely is that young people today are missing. They're missing confidence because they're lacking the actual real life experiences before they graduate. They're not getting the hands-on interaction. I mean, I bring guest speakers in. I have them go out and do different field trips. We do role playing, and I encourage the students to do informational interviewing and job shadowing, all of that to be part of their actual qualification to graduate. That's just my biased opinion. So they're lacking the confidence through those life skills that I mentioned, but they're also lacking actual professional connections. Because Cami, they're like, oh yeah, networking, that sounds great. We know we should network. When they ask me about networking, go ahead. Senior year, as they're graduating or have just recently graduated because they finally sort of got all their papers and exams in, not to undermine those, but that's not the only part of having yourself be prepared for your new chapter. It's really about building those professional connections. I would say sophomore year, junior year at the latest. And I'll give you a funny visual. I didn't bring my red flag right now. We can do another segment if you're interested. I literally said in one of my courses last fall that I had designed called Life Lab, I said, if you're a junior sitting here and you have not yet gotten industry-related experience in your field, or at least a field of interest, red flag. I literally waved a red flag, and they're all like, oh my goodness, what do I do? I'm like, well, you just start by talking with people, and it's not like you have to have the perfect thing to say. As I know, Cami, you said something that's one of my favorite lines. This is why we're soul sisters. 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? When in doubt, zip it and listen twice as much as you speak. And magic opens up. People are going to leave that interaction with you and say, what is it about that Cami Baker? I just want her to be around and be on my team. I don't know quite what it is. It's because you decided to listen. And at this point, I'll do that now in the program. So that's really key.
A couple of years ago, I went to Sage Summit, which was in Chicago. And there's a lot of lessons in this. It was in July. And constantly when I'm scheduling meetings and speaking engagements, people want to give the excuse during the summer, oh, kids are out of school and people are on vacation and you can't do an event because people won't show up. Well, I went to Sage Summit in Chicago. I actually went to a Bill Walsh event, a Rainmaker event before. I went to 3 events in 1 week in Chicago. 10,000 people were at Sage Summit. And
Wow.
I always tell people, they may not be going to your event, but they're going to other people's events because they know how to market and they know how to build value. So I'm at Sage Summit, and besides the guy from Virgin there, Richard Branson, there were a lot of big stars, Zooey Deschanel, Ashton Kutcher. I always think of him as the stoner on that 70s show, but this man is he's actually really a brilliant, very, very savvy, very, very sophisticated investor. And so they were asking him on the panel, you know, what do you attribute all this? At that time, he owned a part of like 600 companies, including Uber, you know, just very visionary. And one of the things he said was, I got to be what I'm doing, who I am, owning these companies because I got in rooms with people that were smarter than me and I shut my mouth. He said, I sat in those rooms with my mouth shut and I listened for a couple of years until I had something of value to bring to the table. And he said, because I kept my mouth shut and my ears open, I learned about business, about investment, about what a good deal is, about what's coming down the pike. So, you know, it's so true. 2 ears and 1 mouth. And then you're mentioning about the kids and how they need to get real life experience. It reminds me, about 8 years ago, one of the colleges in Manchester, it was spring break, and a friend of mine who does stuff with the Red Cross and is just really active and out, he put me in contact with them because they had all these kids at spring break that they weren't drinkers, they weren't partiers, they were Christian kids, and they wanted to do something of service. And I don't remember whose idea it was, but we ended up doing a toilet drive for the local homeless and veterans and people who were in need. So here's what we did. We had a week, it was spring break time. What we did was we put together a list of all the places where they could get toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, things like that to do this toiletry drive. So we put together a list of all the dentists, all the hairstylists, and all the hotels. Because they all have those, they buy all that stuff in bulk, right? So we wrote a script. And I taught these kids, so there were a handful of kids who wanted to do the script and learn how to pick up the phone and how to interact and how to not be afraid to ask for stuff. And so we wrote the script, we role played, some of them made the calls, others had cars and they went to the dentist office or to the hotel to go pick up all the things that were donated. And by the end of the week, we had a room full. I don't remember exactly what the count is. I've got a photo from 8 years ago of just like, there was like 800 toothbrushes and, you know, 5,000 bars of soap and 600 bottles of shampoo. In other words, these kids got real life interaction, prospecting, asking, basically selling themselves, closing the deal, going and picking stuff up, being interactive with other human beings, making eye contact. You know, what a wonderful way to get the kids involved and involved in the community and what's going on and what can really use their. We should talk about doing something like that. Like,
we really should. Absolutely. It's a wonderful model. It's brilliant. I love it. It's such a great visual example of there's good in, you know, it's not one or the other. I think there's this myth out there. Either you're going to do good work in the world or you're going to be some greedy jerk. You know, it's like, wait a second, you could do both. You can actually do well by doing good, which I know is really close to your heart. So I'm preaching to the converted.
I love that you bring that up because T. Harv Eker, Secrets of the Millionaire Mind.
Bring it. That 2005.
I read that book from cover to cover, from coast to coast. And, you know, sometimes you'll hear something and you'll hear it over and over and it doesn't really hit you. But I remember being on the plane and one of the chapters was about the difference between rich and poor. And he makes the differentiator that rich and poor, you know, you always got to pre-qualify. It doesn't necessarily mean money. It could mean rich in family, poor in spirituality, like whatever rich and poor means to you. In other words, either an overabundance of something or a whole lack of something. And what he said was the difference between the mindset of rich and poor is that poor people think in either or. Well, so his example was, well, if I could be rich or I could be good, then I would choose good, as though, to your point, that they are mutually exclusive. He said the difference between the poor and the rich is rich will think, well, when I'm good and I'm rich, look at all that I can do as a good, rich person. So it truly is about shifting our mindset to be all inclusive and to know that you can be both. And when you are both, all the good you can do. We talk about doing that, that kind of a drive with these kids. You know, what kind of corporation out there could you be working with that hires you to help them bring in interns, where we could do a campaign like this where they sponsor, bring me in as a strategist with this, and, you know, whether it's Dell or Verizon or Panera's or like whoever this big company is, that they're actually sponsoring something like that, so they're seen in the community as giving back.
Absolutely. I am having flashbacks. I went to a T. Harv Eker program, a lot of different programs there in the 2000s, but I actually brought those distinctions around mindset, rich and poor. Now, if I had to pick one, I grew up more in a poor sort of financially, but not in terms of mindset, because when we didn't have enough money for napkins, my mom said, let's do a craft project. We'll cut them in half. Then you get double, you know? But I think it was 2009, it must have been, and it was a rough point in the economy. And there I was working for the city of Worcester, and I brought T. Harv Eker's the distinction, you know, between rich and poor and the whole thing around mindset. And I was so fired up about it because I so didn't come from that background. It was like, I am still, all these years later, sort of constantly reimagining my own relationship with money. But I was so pumped up, and I literally requested to speak at a staff meeting in local government. And they will still, like, my friends there will still laugh to this day. Like, I was almost booed out of the room because I was so fired up, but didn't communicate it probably as I should have, that I offended all sorts of people during a time of high unemployment. And I was like, I'm one of you, like, sorry, I need to work on my delivery. So really great. There's so much we could talk about. I don't want to take it off in too far of a direction here, but I totally get it.
I am misheard a lot of the times, even till this day. People, you know, and you know, but you know what? I was at an event last night, and there were maybe 25 people in the room, and I raised my hand and I made a comment, and sure enough, the very next person that raised their hand made some comment contrary to what I said, in direct relation to what I said. And at first in my head, I thought, God, how is it that I'm being so misheard? Like, that's not what I meant. And, you know, and I'm starting to kind of give myself a hard time. And then I thought, you know what? The reason that I was even heard was because I raised my hand, you know, and so many people won't raise their hand and they won't participate in the conversation, and they hide from being seen, and they are afraid of being judged. So, you know what? I'd rather be misheard than not heard.
You know, there's so much there, Cami, and, you know, having done a lot of work in human development, it's so true. So many of us, like all of us, like if you're a human, and sometimes, you know, my brother likes to say, but you're really an alien, Amy. But all of us who are humans, so whatever it is, 7.5 billion humans on the planet, we all have a past, although we are not defined by it unless we give it permission. And in our past, there's always things that happen. Let's say in first grade, when you raised your hand with such vigor and you got the answer wrong, and then you had that public display and you decided, I am never doing that again, right? And so not that that incident is going to be bound to be repeated, but in our mind, we create this sort of protective layer. We're in survival mode. Most of the 60,000 thoughts we're having in a day are negative. You know, it's like a survival strategy. So it's like constantly, you know, recognizing what thoughts are we allowing, what tapes are we allowing, tapes, I know that's old school terminology, are we allowing to continue circulating through our minds, because our thoughts become things and our words therefore create our world. And we're training people how to relate to us all the time. And so when I have those moments, because trust me, Cami, I'm right there with you. There are definitely things that I say, again, very passionate. I think it's so insightful. And then I'm like, quote unquote, misheard. And I'm like, well, you know what? The power is to just sort of, first of all, take a breath and recognize that I'm the one, like you said, who chose to speak out. And it's always like, as long as I'm living and breathing, you know, I've got another day, you know, what a blessing. So I get to continue learning how to connect with people, even at a higher level, and just humble myself and say, okay, let me just listen a little bit more and connect and have that rapport, because as you know, people don't really remember most of what is actually said, right? It's so much more powerful to get that we are human beings first before we're human doings or sayings or havings. We're human beings. And so it's really about how we leave people feeling, which is one of those famous Maya Angelou quotes. I can't take credit for that. But yeah, it's really about, recognizing that we really can connect. And usually we connect and build rapport in a way that involves less words, not more. And that's something I'm still learning, clearly.
That is the truth. And when I'm role playing with people on scripts and how to make prospecting calls and things, the less you say, the more you make. The less you say, the more you make. The more you say, the less you make. The more you say, the less you make. And it is something that people like you and I have to practice on a daily basis. We can preach it, but can we live it? The less you say, the more you make. So we've got about a minute and a half left.
Ooh, speaking of which.
So in the next 60 seconds or so, because I got to wrap it up for 30 seconds.
Sure.
What are a couple of books or speakers or mentors that you've had over the years that you'd like to recommend? Oh my gosh, that's a long list and a longer conversation, but I do want to make sure that I mention sort of the theme of the show being today is building bright futures, and my particular areas of interest are both in sustainability education, so that we can work together and feel empowered and make sure that we're making green choices that protect our planet so that we actually have a livable planet, whether or not people out there have children. And the other kind of realm that's really important to me is leadership development, because without young people feeling like there's a bright future or hope for themselves, it really can feel quite daunting. So any particular, books or, workshops in either area around sustainability education or leadership development. And I probably should have prepared a list, but just kind of right off the top of my head, in terms of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindset, I mean, obviously the E-Myth is out there. There's, in terms of leadership development, if maybe when we're doing the recording, I can post some things when we actually do the TV, put it out there. So I'd say anything that people can learn about as it relates to how individual choice and individual action can actually individually and collectively help the planet, or training a young person to feel empowered. All right, we're coming to an end. Got to stop the show. Love you, Amy. Thank you for being on the TV show with us. Thank you so much for having me, Cami. Take care, everybody.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.